The sun is just beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. In a simple backyard, the soft rustling of leaves fills the air, a gentle breeze moving through the trees. A man sits in a wicker chair, sipping a cup of tea, eyes half closed, soaking in the calm of the evening. The world feels still, as if time itself has paused. From the corner of the yard, a dog, a golden retriever with fur like sunlight, trots towards the man, tail wagging lazily. In her mouth, something soft and delicate, a single white feather. She lays it gently at his feet, her gaze never leaving him, as if offering him a precious gift. He smiles, intrigued, but it's not the feather that catches his attention, it's the quiet certainty in her eyes, as though she's telling him something unspoken. This routine has become familiar, the feather appearing almost daily, always brought with the same care, the same intent. But today, something is different. The dog's posture, the way she places the feather, there's an almost purposeful air about it. The man watches, his curiosity deepening. He reaches down and strokes her soft fur, a thought lingering on his mind. What is she trying to tell him? As he lifts the feather to examine it more closely, he notices a small detail he hadn't before, a faint pattern etched into the soft, downy surface. His heart skips a beat, and in that moment, the world around him seems to pause. What the dog sensed would change everything. The sun had begun its slow descent, bathing the small suburban neighborhood in a soft, golden light. The air was warm, but a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees that lined the yards, whispering secrets to the world. The soft hum of a nearby lawnmower cut through the stillness, but it was fleeting, soon replaced by the quiet serenity of the evening. Everything felt peaceful in this small corner of the world, as if time had decided to linger a little longer in this particular place. Henry sat on the wooden porch of his house, a cup of chamomile tea cradled in his hands, his elbows resting on his knees. The wicker chair creaked softly under his weight as he shifted, letting out a long breath as he closed his eyes, enjoying the warmth of the moment. The day had been simple, uneventful, just the way he liked it. He had always appreciated the small, quiet moments in life. The world had a way of spinning wildly around him, but here, on this porch, life felt like it was standing still. A gentle rustling from the corner of the yard caught his attention. His golden retriever, Daisy, appeared from behind the rose bushes, her coat gleaming in the fading sunlight. Her steps were deliberate, calm, as if she too were part of the world's stillness. Henry watched as she trotted towards him, her tail wagging in its slow, steady rhythm. Daisy came to a stop at his feet and lowered her head, a small object hanging from her mouth. The feather. Every evening, without fail, she brought it to him. It was always the same, a delicate, white feather, soft and slightly ruffled from her gentle grip. She laid it down in front of him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. Henry smiled, reaching down to stroke her head. "What's this, girl? Another one?" His voice was soft, soothing, and Daisy's tail thumped once in response. But this time, something about the way she placed the feather caught his attention. She didn't nudge it toward him as she usually did. Instead, she simply sat back on her haunches, watching him closely, her gaze steady, as if waiting for him to do something. The feather lay there in front of him, its delicate strands shimmering in the dimming light. Henry stared at it for a long moment, the usual sense of calm that came with this ritual replaced by a faint sense of curiosity. Why this feather? Why had Daisy begun bringing it to him every evening, without fail? It wasn't just a piece of fluff from the air, it felt significant, like a quiet message that was just out of reach. "Why do you do this, Daisy?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. His fingers hovered over the feather, brushing the soft, downy surface. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the evening's peacefulness thickening around him. He could feel Daisy's gaze on him, unblinking, as though she were waiting for him to understand something he couldn't quite grasp. A soft sigh escaped Henry's lips. "It's just a feather," he said, trying to dismiss the feeling that had settled deep in his chest. But as he said the words, he noticed something about the feather that he hadn't seen before, tiny, intricate lines etched into the soft surface. It was subtle, almost invisible at first glance, but when he leaned in closer, he could make out the faintest of patterns. They weren't random, not like the marks of a bird's flight. These lines were deliberate, purposeful. Henry's heart skipped a beat. His eyes flicked back to Daisy, who was still watching him intently. There was something in her gaze now, something that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the feather, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't know why, but he had the distinct feeling that this was important, more important than anything else that had happened in his life lately. Daisy had sensed something, and now, it seemed, he was beginning to understand that what she had brought him wasn't just a feather. It was a key to something he wasn't yet ready to understand. The evening breeze shifted, the rustling of the leaves growing louder. Daisy didn't move. She stayed right where she was, her eyes locked onto his, her focus unwavering. Henry swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment press in on him. He didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was clear, there was meaning in this feather. And whatever that meaning was, it would change everything. The next evening, the sun began its familiar descent, casting a gentle, amber glow across the yard. Henry had finished his workday, but the weight of the feather he'd discovered the night before lingered in his thoughts. It had been a strange, quiet kind of revelation, one that had unsettled him in ways he didn't quite understand. Was it a coincidence? Was he reading too much into it? Or, as his mind raced with questions, was there something more to Daisy's daily ritual? He stepped onto the porch again, his cup of tea warm in his hands. The moment he settled into the wicker chair, the cool evening breeze kissed his skin, filling him with a sense of calm. But tonight, it was different. There was a restlessness in the air, a sense of anticipation that he couldn't shake off. He wasn't sure what was coming, but it felt like something was waiting. Daisy appeared from behind the rose bushes, just as she always did, but this time, there was something about her that seemed different. Her movements were more measured, more purposeful. The usual carefree wag of her tail was replaced by a slow, deliberate swing. She looked up at him with the same calm gaze she always had, but tonight, her eyes held a hint of expectation, like she knew exactly what was going to happen next. Henry watched her as she trotted toward him, her golden fur glowing in the fading light. She stopped in front of him, just like the night before, and lowered her head to the ground. But this time, the feather wasn't soft in her mouth, floating freely with a carefree motion. Instead, she placed it carefully at his feet, holding it just long enough for Henry to notice the way her eyes never left his. It was as though she was trying to communicate something he couldn't quite understand. "Again, huh?" Henry murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a hint of a smile on his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The gentle tug of confusion still lingered, but now, it was joined by a quiet curiosity. He bent down and stroked Daisy's head, feeling the soft warmth of her fur beneath his fingers. Her fur always felt like sunlight, soft and comforting. She leaned into his touch, her eyes still locked onto his, unwavering and focused. Daisy's stillness, the gentle way she placed the feather at his feet, everything about it felt intentional, like she was waiting for him to grasp some unspoken truth. Henry's fingers brushed over the feather again, feeling its delicate softness. He didn't know why, but the texture of it seemed different today. The small, intricate patterns that had appeared the night before were still there, but now, they seemed deeper, clearer, as though they were calling to him. He hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his chest, before he picked it up again. Daisy didn't move. She remained perfectly still, as if her very presence was a part of the stillness in the air. Her eyes softened, but there was still that knowing look in them. She was waiting for him to understand. Henry felt a strange shift inside of him. The feather had become more than just an object. It was a symbol, a sign of something that connected them, something deeper than mere coincidence. Daisy had always been intuitive, but this felt different. It wasn't just her usual attentiveness, it was as though she was guiding him, leading him somewhere he couldn't yet see. "Why?" Henry whispered softly, his voice a blend of wonder and frustration. "What does it mean, Daisy?" The dog responded by sitting beside him, her body close but not touching, as though she were offering him the space to process. She didn't bark. She didn't nudge him. She simply sat, her gaze steady and full of unspoken affection. Henry let out a slow breath, letting the quiet wash over him. As he sat there, gazing at the feather once more, something inside of him clicked. The question of why Daisy had begun bringing him the feather had shifted from a fleeting thought to something that demanded to be answered. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. This was no ordinary feather. It had a purpose, just like Daisy's quiet presence. With a soft sigh, Henry set the feather down beside him, his fingers lingering on its surface for a moment. It was the same feather, yet it felt as though it had been imbued with a deeper meaning, one that he had yet to uncover. But as he looked at Daisy, sitting quietly beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly what that meaning was. The evening breeze shifted again, the soft rustling of the leaves filling the silence between them. And in that moment, Henry realized that whatever Daisy was sensing, whatever she was trying to show him, it was something beyond the ordinary. He felt it deep in his bones, a truth waiting to be discovered, one that he wasn't yet ready for. But Daisy was patient. She would wait for him to understand, just as she always had. As the last traces of daylight faded from the sky, Henry's heart skipped a beat. The meaning of the feather was still a mystery, but he could feel, deep within himself, that it was a message. And that message, whatever it was waiting to be revealed. The days drifted by, each one following the last in a soft, familiar rhythm. The evenings, however, had taken on a new weight, an unspoken anticipation that seemed to settle over Henry the moment the sun began to set. Each night, Daisy brought the feather, and each night, Henry found himself more captivated by the subtle mystery she presented. The dog's quiet, deliberate actions had become the focal point of his evenings, replacing the casual contentment he once took in his solitary routine. It was a Thursday evening when he first noticed the change. He had stepped out onto the porch, tea in hand, expecting the usual calm. Daisy, as always, was waiting for him, sitting at the edge of the yard. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't just sitting, she was looking at him, her gaze sharp and focused, her body tense with an energy that hadn't been there before. Henry paused, his fingers still curled around the warmth of his cup. He hadn't thought about it much, but there was something about the way Daisy watched him now, a knowing in her eyes that unsettled him in the best way possible. She was waiting, not for a pat on the head or a belly rub, but for something more. He felt the hair on his arms rise as he walked toward her, the air around them thick with the unsaid. "Hey, girl," he called softly, and Daisy's tail thumped once, but she didn't move. She stayed rooted to the spot, her eyes never leaving his. It was the way she was sitting, still, focused, alert, that caught Henry's attention. The dog was rarely like this. Usually, Daisy was full of energy, a playful spirit who always sought out attention. But now, she was almost statuesque, as though she were waiting for a signal. Henry felt an odd shift in his chest. There was a quiet pressure, as if something unseen was pulling him toward her. He approached slowly, trying to shake the feeling that he was being led somewhere, though he didn't know where. When he reached her, Daisy didn't immediately nudge him or bring the feather. Instead, she tilted her head just slightly to the side, studying him with an intensity that made him pause. Her gaze was as steady as ever, her eyes shining with that familiar warmth. But now, there was something deeper, a hint of urgency mixed with patience. She was waiting for him to understand, to see what she saw. Henry's breath caught in his throat as he knelt down beside her. His fingers brushed through her soft fur, but she didn't seem to notice. It wasn't the usual affection, this moment felt different, more intimate. Daisy was communicating with him, not through her usual energetic gestures, but through her quiet, unwavering presence. He glanced toward the house, where the soft light from the kitchen flickered through the window. The house was so familiar to him, his sanctuary from the world. Yet here, with Daisy, everything felt new. The ordinary world seemed to fade away as he looked into her eyes, waiting for her to reveal the next piece of this puzzle. "Why, Daisy?" he whispered again, but this time, the question felt different. It wasn't just about the feather anymore. It was about understanding her, understanding what she was trying to tell him. He knew, deep down, that she wasn't just bringing him a feather every evening. She was bringing him something else, something that was slowly revealing itself. He just wasn't sure what it was yet. The wind shifted, and a faint rustling of leaves echoed in the yard. Daisy's tail gave a soft, purposeful thump, but still, she didn't move. It was as if the world had slowed down around them, the evening air thick with the promise of something just beyond reach. Henry's eyes flicked down to the ground, where the feather lay, untouched. But now, there was something else, the faintest glimmer of light reflecting off its surface. He reached for it again, his fingers trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of the moment as he picked it up, the intricate pattern now clear to him in the soft evening glow. It was more than just a feather. There was something intentional about the design, something deliberate. For a moment, he could feel Daisy's gaze on him, guiding him towards something important. His heart raced slightly as he turned the feather over in his hands, searching for some deeper meaning. The lines on its surface seemed to shift under his touch, as though they were alive, moving with purpose. The dog's presence beside him was comforting, yet her stillness made Henry acutely aware of the silence surrounding them. He held the feather up, allowing the light to catch its edges. The subtle etchings on its surface glowed faintly, as if revealing something just out of his grasp. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered, his voice soft but filled with longing. Daisy sat silently by his side, her head tilted slightly, her eyes focused and unwavering. There was a quiet pause, a moment where time seemed to stretch between them. Henry wasn't sure what Daisy had sensed, but he could feel the subtle pull in his chest, the feeling that he was about to uncover something important. He wasn't ready for it, not yet. But Daisy seemed to think otherwise. As he turned the feather over one last time, he saw it, an intricate design, something he hadn't noticed before, running through the fine feathers. His breath hitched. The pattern seemed to spell out something, letters or shapes that were nearly impossible to make out, but there was no mistaking it. This wasn't random. This was something deliberate. Daisy let out a soft sigh beside him, her gaze steady and expectant. There was no urgency in her manner, just a quiet, knowing patience. She had shown him the way, and now it was up to him to follow. Henry sat back on the porch, his hands still clutching the feather, his mind spinning with thoughts he couldn't yet put into words. He wasn't sure where this journey was leading, but he knew one thing for certain: Daisy was trying to show him something. And the answers were there, hidden in the delicate etchings of the feather, waiting to be uncovered. The days blurred together in a haze of golden sunsets and soft breezes. Henry couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so consumed by a single thought. Daisy's quiet presence had become a fixture in his life, a constant, unwavering reminder that there was something more to this world than the ordinary routine he had once found comfort in. Each night, Daisy brought the feather, and each night, the mystery deepened, pulling Henry further into her world. It was Saturday evening when Henry began to notice a subtle shift within himself. The days had grown longer, the air warmer, and the connection between him and Daisy had evolved beyond mere curiosity. The feather had become more than an object, it was a symbol, a constant presence that Henry couldn't ignore. But what did it mean? What was Daisy trying to tell him? That evening, as the last of the daylight bled from the sky, Henry stepped outside, his bare feet cool against the wooden porch. He didn't have to look far to see Daisy. She was already waiting for him, sitting in the center of the yard, her eyes trained on the spot where he would stand. There was no sign of the feather yet, but he could feel it in the air, the anticipation, the quiet charge of energy that always seemed to surround her when she was about to present it. He smiled softly at the sight of her. There was something deeply comforting about Daisy's presence, something grounding in the way she simply was, without expectation. She didn't ask for anything more than his company, his quiet attention. And in return, she offered him something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: connection. As he stepped closer, Daisy rose to her feet, her tail wagging gently behind her. She moved with that familiar grace, her movements slow but deliberate. There was a peaceful calm in her every step, as though she had no need to hurry. The world could move at its pace, but she would always be here, with him, in this moment. Henry knelt down, his eyes softening as he met Daisy's gaze. The bond between them felt deeper now, woven from quiet understanding and unspoken affection. He had grown to appreciate the small things, the way she tilted her head when she listened, the soft thud of her paws against the ground when she moved closer. These were the moments that had begun to mean the most. "Hey, girl," he murmured, his voice tender. Daisy's eyes sparkled as she approached, her body language calm, her movements fluid. She stopped just in front of him, and, as if on cue, she lowered her head, presenting the feather to him. Henry's breath caught in his throat. The feather was just as delicate as the night before, but tonight, it seemed even more significant. He noticed that, once again, the intricate pattern was present, clearer than ever, its lines flowing with a quiet purpose. He had tried to make sense of it before, but tonight, it felt different. It felt connected. As if the lines on the feather were not only meant for him to see but for him to understand. He reached down to pick it up, his fingers grazing the soft surface. Daisy didn't move, her gaze unwavering. She watched him carefully, as though waiting for him to decipher the message she had brought him. Her silence spoke volumes. There was no rush, no urgency, only quiet encouragement. As he held the feather in his hands, something inside of him shifted. The question he'd been asking all along, why, began to find its answer. The deeper connection he had with Daisy wasn't just about this ritual. It was about understanding her, understanding the trust she placed in him, and allowing himself to be open to whatever she was trying to communicate. The wind stirred around them, a cool breeze brushing against Henry's face. It carried with it the scent of the nearby jasmine bushes, the fresh earthiness of the evening. Daisy shifted her weight slightly, her body pressed close to his, her warmth radiating through the air. It was a quiet, intimate moment, and in that moment, Henry realized how much he had come to rely on her presence. He ran his fingers gently over the feather, tracing the lines once more. He had been so focused on deciphering its meaning that he had forgotten the one thing that Daisy had always shown him: sometimes, there didn't need to be an answer. Sometimes, the act of giving, the quiet gesture, was enough in itself. Henry felt a wave of emotion wash over him, the kind that he hadn't felt in years. It was a mixture of gratitude and quiet joy, a warmth that spread through him like sunlight. Daisy had been his companion through so many seasons of life, and now, in this moment, she had brought him something that was more than just a feather. She had brought him a reminder to slow down, to feel, to be present. His fingers tightened slightly around the feather, and he smiled down at Daisy. "Thank you," he whispered. There were no grand words, no sweeping gestures. It didn't need to be said aloud. The connection they shared spoke louder than anything he could articulate. Daisy nudged his hand gently with her nose, as though acknowledging his words. Then, with a soft sigh, she lay down beside him, her head resting on her paws. The world seemed to slow around them, the night deepening in the quiet space they shared. Henry sat there for a long while, the feather still in his hand, feeling the weight of its significance, though he couldn't yet explain it. There was something about this moment, something simple and pure, that filled him with a sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. Not tonight. Tonight, he simply allowed himself to be with Daisy, to experience the quiet comfort of her presence, to bask in the love that was given without condition. As the stars began to appear in the sky, one by one, Henry felt something shift within him. The mystery of the feather was still there, lingering, waiting to be understood, but now, it felt like something to embrace. Daisy had brought him closer to something profound, a connection that was beyond words, a quiet mystery that didn't need to be solved, only felt. And in that moment, as the night enveloped them, Henry knew that whatever Daisy had sensed, whatever she had brought him, it was part of something bigger. A bond, a message, something that would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The days continued to unfold with quiet elegance, each one a slight variation on the last, yet rich with a subtle depth that Henry had never fully appreciated until now. Daisy's daily ritual remained unchanged each evening. She brought the feather, her eyes full of that same calm intensity, her movements quiet but purposeful. Henry had come to look forward to the moment when she would appear in the yard, as if everything else in the world faded away in the presence of that simple act. The routine had settled into his life like the soft hum of background music, always there, comforting, but not fully understood. But on the sixth day, something changed. It was another evening filled with the quiet tranquility of a late summer's day. The sky, painted in hues of purple and gold, stretched endlessly above, the light softening the edges of the world. Henry had just sat down on the porch, the warmth of his tea seeping through the porcelain cup. The evening air was cool against his skin, but he didn't mind. It was a familiar comfort, the perfect stillness that only came with the dusk. As he gazed out at the yard, he caught sight of Daisy. She was standing in her usual spot by the rose bushes, her golden coat gleaming under the last rays of sunlight. But there was something different this time. Instead of trotting toward him as she normally did, she was standing still, watching him, her posture almost expectant. Henry felt the weight of her gaze, a quiet pressure that seemed to pull at something deep inside him. She was waiting for him, as always, but tonight, she seemed to be waiting for something more. He stood up slowly, his heart rate picking up slightly as he stepped off the porch. As he walked toward Daisy, he felt a sense of anticipation building in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't fear or nervousness, just a quiet knowing that something was about to happen, something that had been building between them for weeks. "Daisy," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. She didn't respond, not with her usual wagging tail or playful energy. She simply watched him, her eyes as calm as ever but full of something else now, something he couldn't yet name. As he got closer, Henry saw the feather resting at her feet, just as it always was. But this time, there was a difference. The feather wasn't simply lying there, untouched. It was placed with an almost deliberate precision. Its intricate patterns seemed more pronounced, glowing slightly in the dimming light. The feather almost seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as though it were alive in some way, alive with meaning. Henry reached down and picked it up, his fingers brushing the soft down. He felt a strange warmth spread through his body, as though the feather itself were alive with purpose. The patterns on its surface, which had always seemed so delicate, now appeared to be more than just a design. They were words, or at least, shapes that could have been words if he could only understand them. For a long moment, Henry held the feather in his hands, staring at the markings. The lines seemed to shift, to move beneath his touch, as though they were telling him something he wasn't quite ready to hear. He closed his eyes and let the stillness wash over him, focusing only on the sensation of the feather in his hand. When he opened his eyes again, he could see it. The words were still unclear, but the shapes, those patterns, felt like they were telling him something familiar. Something important. Daisy's steady presence beside him was a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. She wasn't pushing him to understand. She was simply here, offering him the space to find the meaning in his own time. There was a calm certainty in the way she sat beside him, her gaze still fixed on the feather. She knew that the moment of discovery would come. It was only a matter of when. Henry's thoughts began to drift, pulling him back to a memory from long ago. He remembered a time when he had sat in this very spot, in this same chair, feeling just as lost as he did now. Back then, life had been simpler, quieter, before the weight of the world had grown heavy on his shoulders. And yet, as he sat there now, with a feather in his hands and Daisy by his side, he realized that the sense of loss he had once felt had slowly faded. The dog, with her quiet intuition, had shown him how to find peace again, how to trust that the answers would come when he was ready to hear them. Daisy's tail gave a soft, contented thump against the ground, breaking his reverie. He smiled at her, his heart swelling with affection. She had always known what he needed before he did. In a way, she had been preparing him for this moment. Preparing him to see what the feather truly meant. The wind shifted gently, the soft rustling of leaves filling the air. Henry took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of the evening. The mystery was still there, lingering in the pattern of the feather, in the quiet trust of Daisy's gaze. But it wasn't a mystery to fear. It was a mystery to embrace. For the first time, Henry felt a deep connection to the message Daisy had been trying to convey all along. It wasn't just about the feather, it was about trust, and love, and the way life unfolded when he allowed himself to be present. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Henry stood up, still holding the feather in his hands. Daisy followed suit, rising with him, her movements slow and purposeful. There was something in her eyes now, something gentle, yet profound. She knew he had taken the first step in understanding her message. "We're getting there, aren't we, girl?" Henry said softly, the words barely escaping his lips. Daisy's tail thumped once in reply, her eyes sparkling with quiet affection. The night had fallen completely now, the stars twinkling brightly above them. For a moment, the world felt small and perfect, as though nothing else mattered but the bond between him and this incredible dog who had brought him so much peace. The feather, with its intricate patterns and its quiet power, still hummed softly in his hands. And though the full meaning had not yet been revealed, Henry felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Daisy, but to the world around him. The mystery would unfold in time, but for now, he was content. He didn't need all the answers. He just needed to trust the process. The days grew longer, the evenings warmer, and still, Daisy continued her ritual. Every evening without fail, she brought the feather to Henry, her eyes steady, her movements deliberate. The pattern on the feather had become clearer, its meaning more undeniable, yet still elusive. Henry had spent hours, days, trying to make sense of it, turning it over in his hands, feeling its surface, staring at the markings as if they would somehow reveal their truth. But each night, the feather held its secrets, and he could feel himself growing more attached to it. What had started as a quiet mystery had become something more, a thread weaving through the fabric of his life, tying him to something deeper, something unspoken. It was Thursday evening when everything changed. Henry was in the yard, absent-mindedly running his fingers through Daisy's fur as she lay beside him, her head resting gently on her paws. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a soft, golden glow over the yard. The world was still, save for the rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant chirping of crickets. It was a perfect evening, peaceful, serene, but Henry could feel a tension in the air, a sense that something was about to shift. Daisy lifted her head from the ground, her eyes scanning the horizon as she stood up. Henry followed her gaze, his heart skipping a beat. In the distance, a figure was walking slowly up the street, a man, tall, with dark hair and a familiar gait. It was Henry's brother, Tom. He hadn't seen Tom in years. Henry's breath caught in his throat as memories flooded his mind, memories of a time before the quiet routine of his life had settled in. Tom had been his closest friend, his confidant. But after their father's death, things had changed. They had drifted apart, the distance between them widening with each passing year. There had been arguments, misunderstandings, grief had done its work, and the connection they once shared had frayed. Tom was getting closer now, his steps slow but purposeful, and as Henry watched him approach, a flood of emotions washed over him. There was a weight in his chest, a tightness in his throat that he couldn't explain. Was this the moment he had been waiting for? Was this the reason Daisy had brought him the feather? Daisy's soft whine pulled Henry from his thoughts, and he looked down at her. Her eyes were fixed on Tom, but there was no tension in her posture. She wasn't anxious or worried, she was simply waiting. As if she knew that this moment was coming, just as she had known everything else before it. The sound of Tom's footsteps grew louder as he reached the edge of the yard. He paused there, looking at Henry for the first time in years. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, like a blanket that had been stretched too tightly over something long buried. "Hey," Tom said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "Hey," Henry replied, his throat tight. For a long while, neither of them moved. Henry could feel Daisy beside him, her presence calm and grounding. The world around them had faded into the background, leaving only the two brothers and the weight of the years that had come between them. Tom cleared his throat, taking a step closer. I didn't know where else to go." Henry nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. The emotions were too raw, too fresh. His mind raced, but no words seemed to come. "I saw the light on," Tom continued, his voice breaking slightly, "and I just felt like I needed to come by. To see you." There was a long pause as Henry absorbed the words. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but it wasn't this. It wasn't a reconciliation or an explanation, it was a simple, quiet invitation to begin again, to move beyond the pain of the past. Daisy nudged Henry's hand gently, her warm nose pressing against his fingers. Her quiet presence, her intuitive understanding, was more comforting now than it had ever been before. She was here, as always, steady and grounded, her focus unwavering. She hadn't brought him the feather tonight, but she had brought him something else. She had brought him Tom. Henry swallowed hard. There was something in the air, something in Daisy's unwavering gaze, that told him this was the moment. This was the emotional turning point he hadn't known he needed. And somehow, without even knowing it, Daisy had brought them both to this point. She had sensed what needed to happen, and she had guided him toward it. With a soft sigh, Henry stood up, the feather still gently held in his hand. He looked at Tom, his heart heavy but full of something else now, something like hope. The tension that had held him in place for so long began to dissipate. I think I've been waiting for you, too, Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom's expression softened, the lines of years of distance and hurt beginning to fade. He took a hesitant step forward, his shoulders relaxing as he did. I'm sorry, Henry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know how to make it right. Henry took a step toward him, the gap between them narrowing, not just physically, but emotionally. You don't have to fix anything, he replied softly. We just have to start again. Tom nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, the weight between them felt lighter. The world around them had shifted, and Henry realized that whatever Daisy had known, whatever she had sensed, was unfolding now, in the quiet understanding between the two brothers. As they stood there in the yard, the evening fading around them, Henry realized that Daisy's gift, the feather, the ritual, wasn't just about the feather. It was about healing. It was about trust. It was about taking the first step, even when the path ahead was unclear. And in that moment, with Daisy at his side and Tom standing before him, Henry understood that the meaning of the feather had been there all along. It wasn't just a message, it was the key to his healing, to the healing of his relationship with Tom, to the healing of his own heart. The mystery had been revealed, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet, gentle bond of trust that Daisy had always known would be the key. The first step had been taken. The days that followed the reunion between Henry and Tom were filled with a quiet kind of healing, like the gentle unfurling of a flower after a long, harsh winter. The weight that had hung between them for years and years of silence, misunderstandings, and grief began to lift. They spoke more often, shared more, and slowly, without even realizing it, they were rediscovering the bond they had once shared. It was during this time, in the aftermath of their emotional breakthrough, that Henry began to understand the true meaning of the feather. Daisy's daily offering had not just been about a simple act or a symbol, it had been a message that led him here, to this moment. The intricate patterns etched into its surface had, in their own subtle way, guided him through the complex labyrinth of his own emotions. It was as if Daisy had known that his heart needed to open, that the wound between him and his brother needed to be mended before any of them could truly heal. On a cool, crisp evening, just a few days after Tom's visit, Henry sat outside again, his cup of tea resting on the porch beside him. He had come to love this time of day, when the world slowed, when everything around him seemed to hold its breath before the quiet night fell. Daisy sat beside him, her head resting on her paws, the quiet companion she had always been. Tonight, however, there was a change in the air. The evening seemed even more still than usual, the light softer, the shadows longer. The familiar rustling of the trees and the gentle hum of the crickets felt almost like a soundtrack to the moment, as if everything was in perfect harmony. As Henry sat there, a deep sense of gratitude settled in his chest. He glanced at Daisy, whose gaze was fixed on the horizon, and he realized, with a sudden clarity, that this moment, this quiet peace, was the culmination of everything that had happened. The mystery of the feather, the healing of his relationship with Tom, and the gentle guidance of Daisy, it had all led him here. Daisy's head turned slowly toward him, her golden eyes locking with his. There was something in her gaze now, something that felt like an invitation, like she was asking him to understand something he hadn't yet fully grasped. She had always been there, a constant presence in his life, but tonight, her gaze seemed to hold more depth, more understanding. For a long moment, Henry just watched her, his heart full of emotion. He had always known that Daisy was special, he had always felt the deep connection with her, but now, he understood. She hadn't just been bringing him a feather every night. She had been bringing him pieces of himself, his heart, his healing, his trust. Daisy had never been a passive participant in his life. She had been guiding him, leading him back to what really mattered. I think I finally understand, Daisy, Henry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The dog's tail gave a soft, contented thump against the ground, but she didn't move, didn't break eye contact. Henry let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of her presence settle over him like a warm blanket. In the quiet of the evening, with the world around them at peace, he finally allowed himself to feel the full depth of his gratitude for Daisy, for Tom, for the life he had been so reluctant to fully embrace until now. I've been so focused on the wrong things, haven't I? Henry continued, his voice softer now. I've spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to make sense of things that don't need fixing. And in the process, I lost sight of the one thing that's always been there, you. Daisy's eyes softened, her head tilting slightly as if she understood every word. Henry reached down and ran his hand through her fur, his fingers gently brushing against the soft golden strands. The weight of everything in the past, the tension, the misunderstandings, began to lift, replaced by a feeling of lightness, of clarity. For the first time in years, Henry felt truly at peace. It wasn't because everything was perfect. It wasn't because he had all the answers. It was because he finally understood the truth that Daisy had been quietly trying to show him all along. Love and healing weren't about fixing what was broken, they were about accepting what was, embracing the imperfections, and learning to trust the process of growth. Daisy had always known that. She had always been patient with him, guiding him gently, never pushing, never forcing. She had trusted him to come to the understanding on his own, and now, he was there. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft, lavender glow across the yard, Henry felt a deep sigh of relief escape him. His bond with Tom was healing. His heart was healing. And Daisy, his ever-present companion, had been the catalyst for it all. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and for the first time in a long while, Henry felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for dramatic resolutions. There was only this moment, this quiet understanding, this profound peace that he had finally found. Daisy shifted slightly beside him, her presence grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. She had always known. She had always been there, waiting for him to see the truth. And now, he understood. This is what you've been trying to tell me all along, isn't it? Henry said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Daisy's tail thumped gently against the ground again, her eyes soft with affection. She didn't need to answer. Her quiet presence said everything. For the first time in a long time, Henry felt whole. He wasn't broken, and neither was Tom. Life didn't need to be fixed, it simply needed to be lived, with love and trust and the quiet understanding that sometimes, the answers were right in front of him all along. The days that followed were filled with a gentle kind of joy. Henry, now more attuned to the quiet lessons Daisy had patiently taught him, began to see the world in a new light. He spent more time with Tom, allowing their relationship to grow again, not with the pressure to fix the past, but with the understanding that healing takes time, and it is the small steps, the quiet moments, that truly matter. Each evening, as the sun set and the sky shifted from gold to lavender to deep indigo, Daisy would appear with the feather, still as delicate and purposeful as ever. But now, Henry no longer felt the need to search for answers in the patterns etched upon it. The feather had fulfilled its purpose. It had led him to this moment, to this place of understanding. The mystery had been unveiled, not through any grand revelation, but through the steady, unspoken connection he shared with his dog, his brother, and himself. One evening, as Henry sat on the porch, the warmth of the day lingering in the air, he felt a deep sense of contentment. Tom had gone home, their conversation long and filled with the kind of quiet honesty that Henry hadn't even realized he had missed. There were no grand apologies, no need for anything other than the recognition that they were both human, imperfect, and capable of change. Daisy lay beside him, her head resting on her paws, her eyes half closed as the evening settled in around them. The light had begun to fade, and the quiet hum of the world seemed to envelop them. It was a peace Henry had come to treasure, a peace he had never fully understood until now. He reached down and gently stroked Daisy's soft fur, feeling the warmth of her body next to his. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought me back to myself." Daisy lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with that same knowing gaze. She didn't need to do anything. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, quiet and steady, was enough. Henry had always known that Daisy was special, but now, more than ever, he understood just how profound her gift was. She had been his guide through the storm, patiently leading him toward the calm that was waiting on the other side. And now, as he sat there with her, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky above, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for her, but for everything that had brought him here. The last few months had been a journey of discovery, not just about Daisy, but about himself, about Tom, and about the kind of person he wanted to be. He had learned that healing didn't come from fixing what was broken, but from embracing the messiness of life and finding the beauty in the imperfect moments. Daisy had taught him that. As the stars blinked to life in the deepening sky, Henry allowed himself to fully relax into the moment. The tension that had once clung to him, the uncertainty, the unspoken regrets, had all melted away. There was nothing left but this beautiful, quiet moment with his dog, with the peace he had found within himself, and with the understanding that life, in all its complexity, was a journey meant to be lived with love, connection, and patience. Daisy stretched beside him, letting out a soft sigh of contentment. She was more than just a dog, she was a friend, a guide, and a reminder of the simple, quiet beauty that life had to offer. She had brought him the feather each evening, but it wasn't just the feather that had changed him, it was everything she represented. Her quiet wisdom, her unwavering loyalty, her gentle, unspoken encouragement. As the night deepened, Henry sat back in his chair, content, at peace with everything that had come before and everything that was still to come. He had learned that sometimes, answers don't come quickly or in grand gestures. Sometimes, they come in the quiet moments of connection, in the slow unfolding of life, in the simple act of being present with the people and animals who love us. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, the cool night air brushing against his skin. Daisy's steady breathing beside him was a constant, a reminder that even in the stillness, there was meaning to be found. He had found it. The feather, now resting quietly in the palm of his hand, seemed to glow softly in the moonlight, its intricate patterns now a beautiful memory of the journey he had taken. The mystery had been solved. The truth had been revealed. And in the end, it was more beautiful, more profound, than he had ever imagined. "Thank you," he whispered again, his voice barely audible against the night's silence. "For everything." Daisy didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply lay by his side, her presence enough. Together, they watched the stars above, and for the first time in a long time, Henry felt truly whole. The healing was complete.